If you're looking to build big, wide, powerful shoulders, then you're in the right place because today I'm giving you 5 of the best exercises to blow up your delts. All right, let's get into it. So exercise 1 that we're going to talk about is one of the most foundational movements for working the shoulders, which is the overhead press. Now, if you're only going to have one shoulder movement in your program, this would probably be the one to include. There are a few different variations. There is a machine variation, which can be very, very good if you have it available. You can also go for barbells and you can go for dumbbells, which are a bit more versatile. Today, I'm going to take you through the machine variation and we'll go through dumbbell variation as well. So when it comes to doing the overhead press, one of the first things that we need to take note of is the height of the handles relative to your pressing position. Now, there may be a few ways to adjust this depending on the machine that you're using. It could be adjusting the handles here somewhere with a pin, or on this machine, it's the seat. So I can either heighten it or lower it depending on where I want that position to be. In terms of gauging what is a good position, it's going to be different for everybody. Normally, my recommendation is that I want the handle to be just slightly above the shoulder as the starting position. But if you have some shoulder discomfort, you might want it to be a little bit higher of a starting position. Typically, where people will feel the discomfort is in that very sort of starting range. So if you are feeling quite a bit of pain or discomfort when you're doing that initial press, then you can adjust this accordingly to have your starting position be slightly higher. So I'm going to start here. So it's just slightly above the shoulders. One of the things that I also have to take note of is the position of my hands and making sure that they're even. So what I mean by that is I don't want one very, very close on one side and then the other one very, very far away. I'm trying to make sure that these are equidistant. So I'm going to use my thumbs to measure that. From here then, I'm just going to rest against the bench, try and keep my elbows underneath my hands so they're not flared back like this, which would end up in me pushing this way. I want to have them underneath somewhat and then drive up here and then control down all the way. So I'm still accessing this full range, getting just before the position where I stop here before I drive up. I don't want to be doing like half reps up top here. I want to get this stretch on the shoulders as I push through. Also from here, I want to make sure that I'm not overly flaring, which is something that people will do as they fatigue, but I don't want to start in a position where I'm turning it more into like an incline press where my butt is all the way forward and I'm sort of leaning here like this. Okay, rest against the bench, try not to arch the back too much. A little bit is okay. But from here, we're driving up and controlling down. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the dumbbell variation of the overhead press. This is quite a bit more versatile, especially a lot of gyms might not have a machine overhead press, so this might be the variation that you're resorting to very, very often. Now, when it comes to this and the setup, one of the things that you want to look at is the angle of the bench. The more inclined that it is, the more it's going to focus on the upper chest. Obviously, if I put it all the way flat, we'd be looking at something like a bench press, which is a lot more chest focused. But if we're trying to work the shoulders, then we want to stay somewhere within this top range. Now, you could put it all the way vertical like this, but this can be quite challenging for a lot of people to access that range and get a good overhead position. So most of the time, I would recommend for most trainees to go at least 1 back or maybe 2 back from the initial starting position. It's going to depend on the bench and how the increments are. Some are going to be bigger increments, some are going to be smaller increments. But from here, we'll choose this angle. And when you're going through the press, one of the good things about using dumbbells is it allows you to adjust the position of the hand. So if you notice when I was doing the machine, I was forced into a pronated grip, which is a turned out position like this, okay? Which is fine, good for stretch on the shoulders at the bottom in particular, but this can cause some discomfort in some trainees, or it can just feel not quite right. So one of the good things about having the dumbbells, it allows me to move my hands a little bit if I want to here. So I can go for a more semi-pronated or even a fully neutral grip here like this, if this feels more comfortable. So even if you do have the machine overhead press, sometimes the dumbbells can be better just because they're more versatile, easier to switch things up and give you more control. So exercise 2 that we're going to talk about are lateral raises. Now, these are a great exercise to work out the medial head of the deltoid. So when we were doing the overhead press, we're working most of the shoulders here, but this is a fantastic isolation exercise. We can do it with dumbbells or we can do it with cables. There are also some machines if you have a good enough machine at your gym, but those are the variations that we're going to look at today, the cable and the dumbbell. So when we're looking at the dumbbell variation, we can do standing or we can do seated. Now, personally, I'm a bigger fan of doing the seated variation, but sometimes you might not have a bench available. So standing is perfectly fine, But one of the things that you have to focus on is not swinging the body as you do the movement, okay? It's very easy when you're doing lateral raises, especially as you fatigue, to start incorporating the rest of the body, which is one of the reasons why I like to use the bench, because it limits your ability to do that. But if you are doing a standing variation, you just have to be mindful of it. Now, when you're doing this technique, you want to keep the elbows very slightly soft, but you don't want to be bending the arms too much, especially as the set progresses. It's very common for people to have their arms mostly straight at the beginning, but then they start to bend more to shorten this moment arm and essentially make the exercise easier as they go along. So you want to try and maintain a consistent arm length as you're doing the reps. You'll notice here as well that I'm not going directly out to the side here. I'm actually coming at a slight angle, working through the scapular plane, which allows me to target the medial head of the deltoid a little bit better. So from here, elbows are slightly soft. I'm controlling the movement, and I'm lifting up at this slight angle and controlling throughout the reps. So if I'm seated, you can see that it limits my ability to swing the arms here and propel my hips. So everything in terms of technique is the same, but this will just limit your ability to do that. Now we're gonna look at the cable variations. There's a few different ways that you can set this up. So I'm gonna show you using a D handle and then also using a cuff. If you have this available, it can be very, very good. But if you don't, a D handle is also just fine. From here, in terms of the setup in regards to height, I wanna have it where if my arm is down by my side, it's relatively close in terms of how it's lined up here like this, okay? So if I was going for a lateral raise here, I have a relatively straight line of pull. I could step out a little bit here like this, so I still have tension in the bottom position. And then from here, I'm just gonna come up, following the same technique as before. So I can come up slightly at an angle in that scapular plane, trying not to have the arm too bent and not to sort of throw my body into it as I go through the reps. Now, the thing with cable lateral raises is that oftentimes, even the lightest weight can be quite difficult. So to mitigate that slightly, you can actually drop the cable stack down, which will give you a less direct line of pull. So despite the fact that I said that you want to have it set up here, like this, in normal settings, if I do want to make it easier, especially if the lightest weight is a little bit too difficult, one way to make it a bit easier is I can drop this down, which will give me a slightly less direct line of pull, which will then make it a little bit easier by comparison at the same weight. So this is a good variation, a little bit more tension, a little bit easier. But if you have it available, one of my favorite variations is to use the cuff instead, okay? Because this then removes grip from the equation. You don't have to focus on holding the D handle. From here, you just Velcro around your arm like this, and you can go here, everything the same, coming out to the side here like this. If I want to get a slightly better stretch on the shoulders, then I can also opt for having the arm behind my back, which will allow me to get a slightly deeper stretch at the back here, and then pulling up at the same angle. So the next exercise that we're going to talk about are upright rows. Now, upright rows can get a bit of a bad reputation. A lot of people will say that they are very high injury risk, which can be true if they're executed incorrectly, but they can still be a fantastic exercise for working the medial delt and the traps a little bit when done correctly. So we're going to go through the form using a barbell. Now, one of the things that typically leads to the most injuries is having the grip too narrow. Okay, so you can see here I'm using one of the EZ bars, which I prefer. I find it a lot more comfortable in terms of the grip position. You can use a straight bar, the same rules apply. But if my grip is very, very narrow, I get a lot more inward rotation, and it can cause a lot of strain on the shoulders, especially at the top of the movement. So it comes down to the person, but one of the easiest ways if you are feeling discomfort to try it out and see if it mitigates it is by just increasing the width of the grip. From here then, I focus on leading with the elbows, controlling up, pulling up as high as feels comfortable. Okay, so if I'm pulling up too high, and again, this is relative, you might feel some pain or discomfort, so you can just limit the range accordingly. But I'm focusing on controlling my position, okay? So when I'm doing this, again, similar to the lateral raises, I'm not swinging the body here like this to lift the weight up, because again, that's going to result in me using more weight than I can control. I want to focus on controlling throughout the whole movement, leading with the elbows, pulling up, and then controlling down here. Exercise number 4 that we're going to talk about are the rear delt flies. Now, this is a fantastic exercise because it hits a muscle or part of the shoulder that we haven't really touched upon with a lot of the other exercises so far, which is the back of the shoulders, the rear delts. So today we're going to look at the machine variation. If you have it, it's great to use, but if you don't, then we're also going to be looking at the cable variation. We're going to start with the machine variation. So most of the time, you'll see this one is a pec deck and a rear delt fly. So it has the adjustable pin here like this. If I was going for pec deck facing out, I would be doing it this way, but then I would turn it all the way in here like this for the rear delts. So I'm going to be facing inward on the machine, and I'm going to go for this overhand grip here like this. Although you can go for this grip also if it feels more comfortable. One of the things to be mindful of when you're using this grip, however, is that you don't have as much of a good grip because you have this point here, which is quite weak. So when I'm pulling, it's actually pulling on that part of my fingers, which can create not so good of a grip here like this. So I prefer to go for this one, but you can choose the one that feels more comfortable for you. From here then, I want to focus on keeping the arms relatively long as I sweep back here like this, okay? So I'm not bending and then extending the arms. I want to keep a relatively straight arm, try and sweep quite wide as I extend back here like this. Now, if I'm getting to the point where my shoulders start to round forward, okay, here is not ideal. This is my shoulder moving in its socket, which I don't want. If I'm trying to work the rear delts, then I just want to maximize the range to the point where I can still maintain this position of the shoulders rather than allowing them to round. And then control in and then back. Now we're going to look at the cable variation of the rear delt fly. Now we're going to go through single arm variation because it's a little bit easier to get the hang of. When you're doing this, typically the most common way to hold the cable is just going to be to hold. Most of them have this little ball here, so you're just going to hold onto this. Okay, it can be a little bit tough on the grip, but fortunately with rear delts, they're not normally going to be super, super heavy anyway, and especially if you're doing one arm. So hopefully the weight won't be so heavy that it becomes an issue in terms of the grip, but you can use chalk if you need to, or anything else to try and make your grip a little bit more secure. From here, you can see that I've set the cable stack slightly higher than my eye line. So I'm going to have my arm sort of traveling on this slightly diagonal path. So my arm's coming out at like 75 to 45 degrees to my body, just to get a good line of pull on the rear delts themselves, which is one of the benefits of using the cable versus the machine, is that you can adjust the arm path a little bit as well. So from here, I'm just going to hold the cable like this. I can grab onto the stack for support if I need to. And then again, I'm trying to keep the arm relatively straight. There might be slightly more elbow bend here just because of the angle, but I'm still trying to make sure that I'm not bending and straightening my arm through the movement. I keep this arm relatively straight as I go through, getting this extension at the end, and then controlling and getting this stretch in the rear delts at the top of the movement. So I'm here, nice and slow up, and then control out, feeling this contraction as I go into every rep. Exercise 5 that we're going to talk about are front raises. Now, front raises also get a little bit of a bad rap because a lot of trainers will say that if you're doing presses enough, then your front delts should be getting enough volume that you don't need to do these. And I do agree with that. However, there are times for you to use the front raise, especially if you're having issues with, say, the elbow, or you're trying to allocate more volume to the shoulders without allocating as much volume to the chest. Okay, so there are still times and places where you might want to do front raises. Another one is if you're, say, supersetting exercises and you really want to toast the front delts, you can do something like a dumbbell overhead press followed by an isolation movement like a front raise. So when we're talking about front raises, a lot of the cues are going to be similar to what we were talking about when we were doing lateral raises. Okay, one of the big ones being trying to avoid swinging. So later I'm going to show you the seated variation, which can help to mitigate that to an extent, but it is still something to be mindful of when you're doing the standing variation. From here, I can either go one arm at a time, here like this if I want, trying to keep the movement controlled, or I can go both at the same time, here like this. Elbows slightly soft, but again, trying to make sure that I'm not bending and straightening the arm as I go up. I'm trying to maintain this distance, this relatively straight arm throughout the movement without swinging. You can see here that I'm going for a pronated grip. Now this is fine, but if you're having some discomfort, then you can also go for a neutral grip here like this. So whichever one feels more comfortable and feels better for you, you can stick with. And again, if I'm trying to avoid the swinging, then I can go for a seated variation, and I can go for the same thing. So from here, nice and controlled, up and control down, either pronated or neutral. Okay, that's it for today, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, drop a like. And if you have any ideas for any future videos, then drop them in the comments below. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next one.